sit there. There's to get one more, but if you can hear me okay, I'll just get going here. So, great crowd. I know we're having more people come in. Delighted to be at the kickoff panel this morning on cryptocurrency. We'll talk about crypto and blockchain and stablecoins and CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. And we have an all-star panel up here today. To my right is Attorney General of Vermont, T.J. Donovan. And next to him is Brian Quintenz, who's the... yep. There you go. Maybe you can hear me better now. Brian Quintenz is the recently former commissioner of the CFTC, Commodities Future Trading Commission. And actually about a month ago, Brian and the general, we had an opportunity to speak in Burlington, Vermont. I guess, Brian, you were virtual, but the general held a state attorneys general forum on a number of issues like today, but spoke on cryptocurrency and did such an excellent job as a moderator. I said, we got to have him back for another event. And then to my far right, I'm not sure that's politically, but Andreas Jahn, who's a senior foreign policy advisor to the German Bundestag. And so we really have a collection of state, federal, and international perspectives here today. So first of all, let me ask anybody in the audience, anybody own cryptocurrency? A couple hands there. And people understand it? You get asked a lot, what's cryptocurrency? Okay, so we'll have, hopefully towards the end of the program, an opportunity to take some questions, or during if you want to raise your hand. But why don't we start there, just kind of cryptocurrency 101, because it is kind of it's a new phenomenon, 8 or 10 years, hadn't been around. It's becoming, day by day, something much more popular. People are buying cryptocurrency, using cryptocurrency as a form of payment or as an investment. So, Brian, you've been watching this area for a long time. I mentioned you're the former commissioner at CFTC, also doing some work with Andreessen Horowitz, which is probably the lead investor in this space, based out in California. But maybe you give a little background on the space for our audience here today.
Sure. Thanks, JC. And I would like to add my thanks to Congressman Pittenger for organizing these forums and for inviting me. I was a former commissioner of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, that is the derivatives regulator for the U.S. financial markets. 3 months into my role, in December of 2017, a derivative exchange listed a Bitcoin futures contract, which made it the first regulated derivatives cryptocurrency product in the world. That event kind of put the CFTC in the front and center of the crypto community and in the policy debate around cryptocurrencies. I was fortunate enough to sponsor one of our advisory committees at the agency, the Technology Advisory Committee. And after that listing of that product, the Technology Advisory Committee had about 7 or 8 incredibly detailed, public, open webcast and now archived meetings on various aspects of crypto. What is it, the different consensus mechanisms, proofing mechanisms, custody issues, integrity of the spot market and exchanges, self-regulatory constructs. And I think it was one of the most detailed and open dialogues within the federal government on crypto over the last 4 years, and I was proud to be a part of it. So in leaving the CFTC, it was the technology was something in which I believed. I'd always had a strong belief also in the freedom of financial market participation and the freedom of individuals to express value how they choose. And so it was kind of a natural fit for me to translate my prior government service and connect it with my overarching personal and political philosophy and embrace a role advocating for crypto. So I'll try to couch my remarks as only my personal opinion, but feel free to view them as colored by anything. We can't escape, our current environment or our prior, personal preferences. The way I would think about, and the way I do think about crypto and Bitcoin specifically, because I think everything kind of started with Bitcoin, is the ability to create a unique digital item. Okay, Up until kind of Bitcoin was created, you always had a double spend problem with something that was digital. It could be copied, it could be traded without really knowing whether or not it was being double spent. If you think about music and the digitization of music, here in the United States and maybe internationally, we always had the Napster problem of people downloading electronic files, MP3s of music, and being able to share them freely and escape copyright laws and not allow the creators of that intellectual property to receive the benefit of the economic consumption of those digital products. So what Bitcoin did, in my opinion, was that it created a process to allow for a unique digital item and solve the double spend problem by creating a ledger that was not centralized, that was distributed among any computer that wanted to connect to the Bitcoin blockchain. That had a number of ramifications, but one of the ramifications was that it made it somewhat tamper-proof. And so far, it has made it resilient to hacks. There have been, some attempts at hacking, some, I would say, minutely successful attempts at disrupting. But over the last, I think, 13 years, the Bitcoin white paper was launched. I think was released on October 31st, 2008, I believe, maybe 2009, 2008. The Bitcoin blockchain has remained completely intact. And this is now something that holds $1.3 trillion of value. So it's not necessarily a small target. And I think that that's something to be admired. So as we think about cryptocurrency, as we think about crypto assets, as we think about the digitization of intellectual property, I think the technology is important to keep in mind because it is going to have a transformative impact on the ability of digital intellectual property creators to ultimately capture the value of their efforts. So with that kind of introduction, I'll pause there because most of the focus, I think, of the panel should be on some of the security issues. But I would like to, at some point, get back to the future of the innovation that we can already see.
Oh, thanks, Brian. I mean, I know that Andreessen's based out in Silicon Valley. This is a hot topic out there. It's a hot topic around the world. They talk about this as the next internet, right? The internet 2.0 or internet 3.0. Internet is a transmission of information. This is a transmission of value in a distributed way. So we're looking at different kind of cryptocurrencies. There's the Bitcoin, but there's some, I think, 8,000 different cryptocurrencies out there. Mm-hmm. Some of these are used as, I'm going to buy my Bitcoin at, I don't know what the initial value was, but now it's $58,000. I have to check my what the current price is today. $50-some thousand for a Bitcoin, and obviously it's divisible. And then there's what's called a stablecoin, which is pegged or tethered to a currency, U.S. dollar, Australian dollar, a basket of currencies, and that's more of a method of payment. And I think the regulators have been trying to figure out what this is, and it's still sometimes termed the Wild West out there, and there's not much regulation. I am one who disagrees with that description. There's a lot of regulation out there. We'll hear more about that from the general and the commissioner. There's federal regulation, AML, anti-money laundering regulation, state regulation, a lot of regulation. Could we regulate more? Possibly. And regulators are looking at ways to do that. I think it's important that they understand, call me old-fashioned, before they regulate, understand actually what they're regulating. So that's a lot of the process now, is education process to the regulators and to Congress in the U.S. and around the world. What is it saying? And should we regulate it? How should we regulate it? And not cripple the innovation that's around that. So I think we spoke of this issue in Panama, and I used the Indian old proverb, I guess, the theory of manifold predictions, where he had the blind man with an elephant, and one touching the trunk, and he says this is a tree, and another the tusk, and another the tail, and feels the brush. So depending on what they touch, they call it something else. And you've seen some of that with the regulators here, where Brian's old organization, the CFTC, this is a commodity we're looking at, and the SEC, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, no, it's a security, and IRS said, no, it's property, and then another organization, no, it's currency. And it may be all these things. It is kind of it's a new technology, and figure out, how do we regulate this as security? Do we regulate this commodity? Regulate something else? And but while we're still on the topic of what this is, General or Andreas, if you want to chime in, and maybe Andreas, do people look at this the same way in Germany or in Europe as we do in the U.S.?
Yeah, definitely. I also would like to thank, before starting my remarks, Congressman Pittenger, because not all of you might know that this started in 2014 for all this Intelligence Security Forum, bringing together members of parliament from Europe and especially here from the United States. So it's a long track record, and today, day by day, we celebrate our 7th birthday. So I hope that the 7 years of abundance will continue and no famine will come at all here. And thank you, really, Robert, for all your faithful leadership over all those years. I also bringing you warmest greetings from the German Parliament. The head of the chairman of the steering committee, Andreas Jahn, could not join us personally because the day after tomorrow we will vote for our chancellor, and he is a social democrat. I also greet a fellow parliamentarian from Bundestag, from the left party, which came also all the way over. And thank you for joining us, because it's cross-party lines what we are doing, and especially in this field. We will change considerably legislation for the next 4 years. Our new Minister of Finance and Vice Chancellor, Christian Lindner, he advocates for a friendly policy towards cryptocurrencies. He says he wants to create an innovation-friendly legal framework for crypto assets and enable digital securities of all kinds. So we might know a little bit a shift of mindset in this topic in the whole European Union.
In general, so I come from the great state of Vermont, and as I mentioned, we had the opportunity to be up there 2 months ago in October. Perfect time to go to Vermont, by the way, and the leaves are changing color and all that, so enjoy that. But thanks for coming to DC too. I know you have other business here this week, but great to have you here.
Well, JC, thanks for having me, and thanks for the plug for the great state of Vermont. Come any month of the year to Vermont. You're more than welcome, and we look forward to seeing you. I want to thank Congressman Pittenger, too, for the kind invitation to join JC and Brian and Andreas here this morning. When I think, I'm fascinated by cryptocurrency, and I start at a very basic rule that change is the only constant. We're seeing disruptions in every sector, and finance is no different. And I think the question for somebody in my position, which is the chief law enforcement officer of a state, is what does this mean for the average consumer? How do we protect consumers in this new world? And in this new world where, again, coming from a state that's small, that's rural, that is in need of economic development, we certainly want to embrace innovation. But I also think that there's a question with technology. And it's a very simple question that I think we all know the answer is, has technology outpaced our laws? And I think the answer to that is yes. So how do we balance innovation? How do we balance the need and the demand for economic development, for jobs, particularly from a rural state where we want to engage in a global digital economy, while balancing that with the pillars and the fundamentals of consumer protection? And for me, when we talk about this issue of crypto, and as Brian said, utilizing that underlying technology, the blockchain technology, which I think there's a lot of different utility for that, how do we create a regulatory framework from a federal, from a state? And JC, you're absolutely right. What this means to consumers is, who's in charge of this? Is it the SEC? Is it the CFTC? Is it the IRS? What does it mean to the average consumer? Do they have to report this as a taxable income? How do you tax it? What happens when you get a call if somebody gets ripped off, if there's a scam? And from a law enforcement official, there's one basic question where we say that this is anonymous and decentralized. Who do I talk to? Where do I send the subpoena? And that's why we need a regulatory framework from a federal and state level that balances all this. And I go back to the creation of the SEC. Why was the SEC created? Created when Franklin Delano Roosevelt assumed the presidency in 1932, shortly thereafter, after the stock market crash of 1929, and an unregulated market. And if we should look towards our history to guide us into this new market, embracing innovation, embracing economic development, but also remembering about the consumers, that folks have a right to access this marketplace, but they should be protected in the marketplace by government regulation.
Yep. That brings up an actually interesting topic. So there's existing laws out there that may have been, they were put in place before crypto came around, but they can apply to crypto. So there's the analog laws that apply to the digital realm, and that covers a lot already. So at the state level, federal level, international level, but there's also a need for maybe new laws that apply to these prodigy technologies. So that's where Congress or your legislative branches come into play in creating these new laws. And do we need a new regulator? Are the existing regulatory structure and multiple federal agencies and state agencies and international agencies are all regulating this space? Is that sufficient, or do we need to create a new, maybe federal regulator over cryptocurrencies? And Brian, we were talking about that a little bit yesterday, and that concept is out there. There's some advocating to set up a separate, crypto regulator. And I don't know if you have views on that, or?
Yeah, let me just take a moment to try to walk everyone through the regulatory jurisdictional landscape in the United States with regard to crypto assets or with regard to financial products and commodities. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission has both enforcement and oversight authorities. If you view kind of the tools of a regulator as having after the fact enforcement capabilities to punish for violations, and before the fact regulatory obligations for oversight activities and setting standards. The CFTC has both of those functions for the derivatives marketplaces, for futures contracts, for swaps contracts, and setting rules on how those are traded, to whom they are traded, what amount of money needs to be put up for them, the data reporting, capital requirements, all kinds of things. The Securities and Exchange Commission has authority over the trading of securities. And all the different instruments that qualify as securities, debt instruments, stock instruments, and certificates of deposit, all various forms of securities offerings. If something qualifies purely as a commodity, meaning it is not a commodity derivative or it is not a commodity that is also a security, and a commodity is basically anything that can be bought or sold in interstate commerce that has a level of fungibility. So if you have something like a classic car, not really a fungible product, not really a commodity, but go through the laundry list of commodities in your head, precious metals, physical commodities, agricultural commodities, things like that. They can also be, interest rates, but that gets a little bit different when you talk about the transferability of them. If something qualifies as a pure commodity, there is no federal regulator that has oversight jurisdiction over how those products are traded. There is no federal regulator from a trading perspective of eBay, for instance. But any entity that is involved with money transmission needs to register at the state level as a money transmitter. So what we have is a number of crypto exchanges that have and crypto companies that have registered in all 50 states as money transmitters. So one of the debates right now, I think in the United States, in Congress and among regulators, is if exchanges, if crypto exchanges in particular, need oversight, if they are trading commodity crypto assets, which ones of those crypto assets may be securities that could then invoke the SEC's jurisdiction and force those exchanges to have to register as either a national securities exchange or as an ATS, an alternative trading system. There was also a lot of discussion among the financial regulators, including Treasury and some of the other agencies like the FDIC and the OCC and the Federal Reserve on stablecoins, and whether or not those need to be issued by banks or whether or not to allow banks to issue them. There are a lot of other, I think there are a lot of issues that brings in that may negatively impact the space. But I think that's one of the important points, I think, in the discussion here in the United States, in which I'm trying to communicate as broadly as I can, is that I think for the last 10 years we've thought about crypto assets from a financial perspective, as a financial instrument perspective, as a financial product. That is not where this space is going. Obviously, I think these will always contain some value, but they will allow value ownership in the way a lot of other revolutions of products have, a lot of legal jurisdictions have recognized. But I think it is short-sighted at this point to try to fit them in a current regulatory model purely for a view that they are financial instruments. And if we were to actually regulate these products or some of these products as securities, we will preclude that innovation from occurring. So I think that there are potential bad fits to applying old law to new technology. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the wrong thing to do to think about new policy solutions to address some of the downside risks that the General just mentioned. Actually, before I leave there, let me just take a survey real quick of anybody in the audience. Let's focus on Bitcoin in particular. Who thinks Bitcoin is a good payment mechanism? Okay, one. Well, let's do it. Let's do it. Just so that we get full participation. Who doesn't think Bitcoin is a good payment mechanism? Raise your hand. Okay, many more, and I would personally agree with you. And I think that for the purposes of this discussion, that is critical, and it is critically important, and it is beneficial at this point. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But let me leave it there for now.
Okay. And General, too, I mean, you from a state perspective, do you feel you have enough tools in the toolbox, I guess, to regulate or enforce around cryptocurrency with the existing laws, or would you be looking, or maybe still thinking about it, but looking for new tools?
I think, JC, where we're at is exactly where you started this conversation, is trying to get educated on this. I mean, I think Brian and Andreas would agree that this is moving fast. Technology moves fast. Government moves slow. And I don't think the answer is to go back and change a law every year. So how do you infuse our existing laws with a little bit more flexibility to address this emerging market? Again, trying to balance innovation with a regulatory marketplace. I keep going back to this issue of what does it mean to the average person who may buy some crypto. I think I would say a very volatile market. I would say, again, ripe for an illicit market. From a law enforcement perspective, where you start at something that's decentralized and anonymous, I think most people in law enforcement would say, well, that makes me a little nervous. And I think there needs to be a level of comfort that perhaps starts with a little bit more understanding of this. But I also think, now when we mentioned ransomware, the ransomware attacks come with a demand to be paid in crypto. And I think we need to balance this issue with fraud, with the illicit trade of this, with legitimate economic purposes. And this is new. So what we're trying to do is to talk to our federal counterparts, which we're going to do this week, to talk to our colleagues across the states, and try to figure out a playbook that we can all operate from that strikes that balance. And I do think that government needs to get up to speed on this, because this is moving extremely fast. And I would say, just anecdotally, and I think I shared this with you, JC, I mean, the number of articles you're seeing now about crypto and Bitcoin becoming more mainstream. I think I saw an email where you can now gift Bitcoin for the holidays or something. Sure. And for me, that says, okay, from a law enforcement perspective, when do we get that first call for some sort of scam? And what are we going to do about it? And at the state AG level, which I'm sure many of you are the same, that's where your neighbors, that's where your family is going to call you. And there needs to be a response, and I'm not sure we have a response right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Andreas?
Yeah, if you see the figures, it's very interesting. At the end of 2019, the total value of US currency in circulation amounted to $1.7 trillion US dollars. And on December 5th, 2021, cryptocurrencies market capitalization is in dollars 2.3 trillion. So that's really a big challenge for the legislators. And let's be honest, I can talk it from our perspective within Parliament. In a general way, parliamentarians have this big gift, as a French intellectual wrote a whole book about how to talk about a book that you didn't read, how to talk eloquently. And so it's a little bit, the challenge to it, how to get the details, how to handle it, even for our legislation. I mean, the new German legislation will come into force on 3rd January next year, and it facilitates the influx of German financial capital into the crypto industry. With some analysts will move, and they open the door into 415 billion of potential investments in cryptocurrencies, and the legal ability is to allocate as much as 20% of the portfolio into crypto assets. So coming back to these figures, sometimes when I'm talking with, and I'm sure that in your party it's quite the same, when you talk with the experts, it's a little bit feeling like our philosopher Hegel. He came into the University of Vienna, where was the constituency, and he was just talking about the concept of the phenomenology of the spirit, and a lot of the students didn't understand any single word because it was really the high philosophy. And then somebody after 2 months dared to ask very timidly, but Mr. Professor, all what you are talking about have nothing to do with reality. So then Hegel just smiled and talked to him and told him, well, too bad for reality. So when you see the whole picture, we have to adapt on it and have to see there is a shift of mindset. And as legislators, we have to become aware that's no need to just close our mindset and to think, well, cryptocurrency, those are all for the criminals, let them do their business. We have to put hurdles and that they cannot overcome. But that's exactly the objective of our forum, that we harmonize our legislation, and in this way that we then can just fight and really coordinate our fighting against the measures you just described. So that's the objective.
And that's probably a good segue to the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, which sort of overlays this area from a number of countries. And I think it was just about a month ago it came out with the new guidelines on regulating digital assets, what they term virtual asset service providers, and applying existing AML, anti-money laundering laws, and other laws to this space. Have you spent a lot of time reviewing that report? Andreas, but Brian, you can jump in if you want. Okay.
I've spent some time reviewing it. I think that the classification of virtual asset service providers is something that jurisdictions or international organizing bodies are going to need to apply carefully in terms of the regulations that they target for whatever that definition captures. The reason is this is a space where, as Andreas and the General and you, I think, JC, said, there is some level of anonymity associated with transactions. That isn't a permanent anonymity. Law enforcement has had a lot of success. We'll get to this too, I think. Law enforcement has had a lot of success in tracing ransomware payments made, through crypto. But the challenge, I think, with creating, regulatory mandates to this classification of businesses is: are you asking certain entities, groups, providers to do something that they can't do? And are you creating a legal requirement for them to do something that they actually can't meet? And if you are going to push them into a jurisdiction where they, can operate more freely. And I don't think that's a good solution, because as far as I'm aware, the entities that are in jurisdictions like the United States, like Europe, want to abide by the rules, are fine with a well thought through regulatory model that imposes requirements on them that they can meet. But the more that you create things that they can't do, the more they're going to find, a jurisdiction where they can operate as they should. There is a lot of discussion around crypto being used for ransomware payments. There are a lot of different stats and data around how much that is. I have seen 3 studies over the last year that said it is 1% of all Bitcoin transactions, less than 1%. 35 basis points to 50 basis points of all Bitcoin transactions are used for illicit purposes. But then when you think about the transparency and immutability of blockchain transactions, I would suggest to all of you that there is an emerging view in law enforcement, certainly in the federal law enforcement community, within Treasury and within the Department of Justice, that we should almost want every ransomware payment to be made through crypto. When a crypto ransomware payment is made, everybody that is connected to that blockchain knows the date of that transaction, the amount of that transaction, the time of that transaction, the asset, and the wallet address. Further, when you have the wallet address, you can go in and trace every single transaction that has ever occurred in that wallet address. Anyone can. If that crypto is used to pay someone within the ransomware supply chain, a negotiator, a translator, a web developer, a money launderer, a domain hosting service, a domain registrar, or one of the toolkits like malware or exploit kits or phishing kits, then all of a sudden law enforcement has their wallet addresses and can trace all of the entire history of their transactions. This has actually been a remarkable tool from a transparency and traceability aspect for the criminal law enforcement agencies to target ransomware and criminal organizations. One final stat, I guess, before we continue the conversation. When I had asked about the Bitcoin serving as a form of payment, and most people didn't raise their hands, and whoever did, we can talk about that too, because I think we're at an interesting inflection point. But one of the wonderful things about Bitcoin not being a more effective means of payment is that when an illicit entity or person receives it, they want to liquidate it. They want to liquidate it. They want to liquidate their illicit gains. They need to do that through a fiat off-ramp, and therefore it concentrates the attention of law enforcement agencies to the fiat off-ramps that are interacting with these wallet addresses. From 2013 through 2017, one illicit Russian exchange accounted for between 75 to 95% of all ransomware, crypto, fiat off-ramp activity. That exchange was shut down in 2017, or to some degree was shut down. The executives were arrested, I think, in Greece. Between 2018 and now, only 4 exchanges, and they're the same 4 exchanges, account for over 80% of illicit crypto fiat off-ramp activity, and a new Russian exchange accounts for over 50% of that activity. This is a very highly concentrated community that can, I think, bring together a lot of international coordination, cooperation to effectively target.
Yep. Joe?
Totally agree, Brian, with your point about the utility of the public ledger and the ability for law enforcement to track that. But that's on the federal side, which has the resources and the capability. And I think one of the challenges from the states, especially from a smaller state that doesn't have the resources, is accessing those resources to do that, to trace that. And I think that, again, it underscores the need for that federal-state partnership and a regulatory framework, and perhaps even a global framework on this, because when you talk about law enforcement, you are talking about government entities, and if you're talking about government entities, you're talking about funding and resources, and the haves and the have-nots. And I think that raises a real issue of fairness in terms of protecting consumers from smaller states that don't have the resources of the federal government to trace and to track. But totally agree with your point about, again, the utility of that blockchain technology of the public ledger that you can track. I think from my office, and I think from many of my colleagues, you might be stopped at who do you call? And can we what we hope to do is to build that partnership. Again, may not be a new law per se, but perhaps a partnership with a MOU between our federal counterparts and state counterparts in law enforcement to do exactly as you said.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think we had maybe a question out here too.
Yes, so thank you, gentlemen, for great remarks this morning. I'm Rosalind Layton, founder of China Tech Threat, and I write about cryptocurrency for Forbes. And I was hoping you might talk a little bit more about what has been the challenge for the U.S. Congress to adopt the regulatory framework. The crypto industry has asked for it repeatedly. Consumers certainly want it. So that's a challenge. And then the other thing I hope you maybe comment on is the SEC has a case against Ripple. And what's interesting is that now 62,000 individuals or holders of this XRP currency are now making a class action against the SEC because they feel that the regulatory action, in their opinion, which is arbitrary, has hurt them. They've lost value in their holdings. It wasn't provided with notice. And so the question is, are consumers legitimately being protected? In this case, the critique of the SEC is that it's regulation by enforcement, not by policy. So, love to hear your comments.
Let me take a stab at that as a former regulator. Luckily not with the SEC, otherwise I wouldn't be able to comment on it. To the first point about Congress, I started off my career on Capitol Hill as a policy aide to a member of Congress with whom I worked for 7 years. And I remember, as an anecdote, I remember maybe the first week or month that I was there, someone, maybe it was a lobbyist, maybe it was another staffer, who knew our office very well, came in from the outside and was providing, I guess, a mentor moment and said, "Now, Brian, I want you to remember, Congress is good at doing 2 things, nothing and overreacting." And I didn't say that. I'm quoting someone that said that. But if you think about the checks and balances in the Constitution, and I attended a Library of Congress seminar the next month on procedure, on congressional procedure and rules, so how to structure rules to get legislation through Congress. And the woman who was leading that seminar said, a lot of people get frustrated by gridlock, but Congress was not created to pass laws. Congress was created to ensure bad ideas do not become law, or at least provide some check on bad ideas becoming law. So if you think about how Congress is structured, how legislation and the mechanism to achieve it is structured, it's no wonder that it can take a crisis to provoke the momentum, attention, energy to develop legislation, get it through committees, pass both chambers, and get it signed by the president. So I think the good news is that we haven't had a crisis in the crypto industry, which I think is actually remarkable. We have almost $3 trillion of value within the crypto ecosystem that is being transacted and traded on a 24/7 basis that has developed over the last 10 years with a market with integrity, liquidity, and price discovery, and we have not had a major crisis without a federal regulatory regime. Now, that doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case or should be the case. But I think that's one of the reasons why you haven't seen congressional action yet. And I think Congress is trying to be thoughtful. And without that crisis, I think they have more time to try to be thoughtful. To your second question on the court case, I guess I would try to answer that more generally by focusing on the potential harm to investors or the harm that investors are claiming in that case. And I think it's a very important point. And I think that as a general matter, I was always strongly against regulation by enforcement. I don't think it's the right policy. I think it's up to a regulator to establish clear rules of the road, to issue regulations, to issue guidance, to issue interpretations, and to have a dialogue with an industry where there is a lot of innovation, a lot of technology, and a lot of fast-moving components so that the agency and the regulator can understand where things are going, and hopefully market participants can understand what the rules are and feel like they can have that open dialogue without immediately getting investigated or prosecuted. And I think that there is a good point to be made that if an agency takes an enforcement action that harms investors and does it under the mantle of investor protection, those two things don't seem to go very well together.
And as you know, and I've read some of your articles, and thanks for that, in Forbes, most of the activity has been in the regulatory space, and certainly the SEC is becoming more and more active. And what is the security? You've got the Howey test, the duck test really is this walk like a duck, quack like a duck is a duck. But Congress has really stepped up now, and it's certainly having a lot of hearings on digital asset issues. And I think there's about 20 bills that have been introduced just this past year on blockchain and digital assets, cryptocurrency, doing different things. Some promote the blockchain, some want to restrict it. The big issue in the last Congress is really around Libra or Diem, and also, so some people want legislation, but I've been doing this long enough. You be careful what you wish for, because you might get it, and it might not be good. It might turn out to be something that you're not so happy with. I'll just note there's been some ideas about it around, particularly around the securities issue that have been put in legislative form. Again, about 20 bills introduced this year in the U.S. Congress. One is this idea of exclusion from the definition of security. So there's two bills, the Token Taxonomy Act and the Securities Clarity Act, that would exclude digital tokens from the definition of security. So sort of black and white. Adds clarity, whether it's the right thing to do or not. And as you know, it's hard to get any kind of legislation through Congress. It's not a partisan issue here, but it's just hard to get anything done. There's an idea that Commissioner Peirce came up with, I think, about a year ago, a safe harbor provision that would require some legislation. There's legislation introduced to do just that by Congressman McHenry, who's the ranking Republican on the House Financial Services Committee, called the Clarity for Digital Tokens Act. And that would amend the Securities Act to create a safe harbor, providing a grace period for exemption from the Securities Act registration requirements. And thirdly, there's another bill introduced by Congressman Don Beyer, a very comprehensive bill called the Digital Asset Market Structure and Investor Protection Act. Does a lot of things, but in there also provides a desecuritization mechanism. So thinking is, you may have a digital asset that starts as a security, but over time is no longer a security. So those are three examples. And at the state level, I think there's at least 30 states or 30 bills around the country around cryptocurrency and blockchain. So more and more happening there. But as Brian noted, it's been thoughtful, and it's good that they're trying to understand the issue before they legislate. And in general, I think you may have had a question or comment.
I mean, I would just reiterate, and I think Brian is absolutely right, the need for regulation and clear rules. But it's not just clear rules for industry, it's clear rules for consumers. So they understand what they're getting into. And they understand what this is. Is it a security? Is it a commodity? Or is it just currency? and how they access justice on these issues. And I'm not sure, from a consumer standpoint, that folks really know. And I think that's a real issue of fairness. It's a real issue of integrity of the system too, because you want people to believe in the integrity of the product. And as I always said, good consumer protection is good business. That requires people to talk, people to get educated, to understand. Again, we're in this age of technology, of innovation, and the law has to keep up. And that is a challenge. You know, one of the things that I think is interesting, JC, that you mentioned is whether or not there's going to be some sort of a digital czar in the federal government overseeing. And I think these issues are, as we accelerate, we have to understand that this is, and I view myself as a pretty good example. I'm not a financial guy. A lot of these terms I'm not sure I understand, but I can get up to speed. And the issue is, how do we make sure that the average consumer understands this, the average consumer has access to information, access to justice, and is protected, and at the same time allow innovation to occur, to have economic development, to have jobs. That's what I want for my state, but I also want Mrs. Smith protected.
And some of the proposals out there, both in the U.S. and globally, are really to apply bank regulations or bank-like regulations to this space. And there's a recent report, President Biden's working group on financial markets came out, I think, the end of, I think it was November 1st, with a report that we've got Treasury, the Fed, and sort of all the regulators together thinking about these issues, and came out with recommendations. And really, the idea is, asking Congress to give the regulators more authority to regulate, maybe where they didn't feel like they had that authority already. But two, saying, potentially requiring through legislation these companies to become banks. And so you'd have some, I guess, better consumer protection because they're now a bank and they have to bank things. And thirdly, and you probably had then supervision by the Fed or the federal state banking regulator. And thirdly, making, and I think this was kind of directed primarily at Facebook and DIA, but maybe more broadly to tech companies, is they would have a affiliation requirement or separate commerce and banking. So an Amazon or a Facebook could not get a bank or be in this space. So that sort of three recommendations it came out with. Brian, I don't know if you looked at that at all or had any other thoughts on the working group.
Yeah, I saw two hands up over here, okay. One up here and one down here. So maybe we get to those questions in a second after I answer your question there, JC. But also to the General's point, in terms of seeking justice, that's a critically important issue that I think requires more communication from the federal side to the state side. Just speaking from my prior role at the CFTC, I described before, the regulator authorities of oversight and enforcement. The CFTC actually still has anti-fraud and anti-manipulation enforcement authority over spot commodity transactions. And we have used that authority extensively, mostly in the precious metal space. There are a lot of precious metals frauds that get perpetrated, mostly with a focus on semi-wealthy retirees, but in an increasing number in the crypto space too. But they aren't necessarily using existing cryptocurrencies. Sometimes they'll go out and solicit funds saying we're going to invest in cryptocurrencies and they steal it. Sometimes it's them, it's these fraudsters creating a new cryptocurrency that they don't create. And the CFTC has prosecuted a number of those. The CFTC and other federal regulators also have public-private partnerships with analytical firms that do a lot of this blockchain analysis, the forensic blockchain analysis. And I don't know what the subscription rates are, but it's something that maybe an association at the state level can participate in, or that a state individual can use, through cooperation with the federal government. So I think, that's an avenue for that. JC, to your point on the stablecoin report from the President's Working Group, the President's Working Group on Financial Markets is composed of the Treasury Secretary, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, the Chair of the SEC, the Chair of the CFTC, with the Chair of the FDIC, the Banking Deposit Insurance Regulator, and the Comptroller of the Currency as observers. So that's what makes that group, that is the composition of that group. they issued a report on stablecoins calling for Congress to consider new legislation around stablecoins with the specific focus on trying to fit them into the banking system or trying to force stablecoins to be issued by banks or through banks. I think there are a number of issues there. The first is that those same kind of rules do not apply to money market funds. And if they were to apply to stablecoins through the banking system, there are a whole bunch of capital requirement rules that translate through that may make that kind of model of stablecoin issuance uneconomic. And some people may not care about that. And if they're uneconomic, they're uneconomic. But the point is that there are a lot of different stablecoin models. This recommendation, I think, was focused on the stablecoins that take in cash, invest that cash in some kind of reserve makeup, and then will redeem that reserve for dollar per stablecoin issuance. So there is some investment management kind of functionality in that model, but there are other models of stablecoins. One is an algorithmic stablecoin that uses a balancing mechanism of an investment in crypto. So it's a crypto-to-crypto stablecoin that creates an algorithmic balancing mechanism to hold its value. It's heavily over-collateralized, but as you create rules and regulations that negate the capabilities or the efficiencies of one, you will squeeze on the balloon and allow it to pop somewhere else. Interestingly, it was through a stablecoin, the USDC, that the U.S. government provided financial support to Juan Guaido, the recognized winner of the Venezuelan presidential election. They had to go through a stablecoin to circumvent Maduro's control over the financial system. And they did that through a South American crypto exchange with, I think, over 500,000 Venezuelan wallet addresses that then could be transacted on that South American platform for Venezuelan currency and redeemable through ATMs. Let's not lose sight of that innovation. And especially when we were talking about foreign aid before, I read and there may be an updated amount to this, but I read a UN report that said 30% of foreign aid goes through a corrupt organization, is unaccountable for, or is illicitly used.
The problem is that you never know which 30%,
Yeah, but you know which 1% of Bitcoin is. And you know exactly where it goes and what it's used for. And I think that's a big opportunity. And I think if you talk to a lot of the government officials involved in foreign aid provision, they are immediately recognizing the transparency associated with blockchain payments for delivering that and ensuring the integrity of those payments.
It's probably why a lot of countries are looking at, we didn't get to this yet, the CBDC, central bank digital currency, right? There's maybe 80% of the countries in the world now are exploring that. Some are more ahead than others. China is pretty out front. I think Nigeria just adopted central bank digital currency. Other countries in Latin America. And other countries, it's a balancing approach. We're going to just ban cryptocurrency, so we don't want any of that. So we have 5 minutes left. There's a couple questions over here. Yes, sir.
Welcome, Georgia, former member of Parliament from Macedonia. This is a very advanced discussion that you're hearing because you're in this for 10 years. So can you go back at some of your answers, some of your talks, and some of your advices when you were dealing with this in 2011? Because I think the vast majority of people here or a lot of people here are international participants, and this is like talking about internet in the year 1990. So my question is, for instance, in my country, there's a lot of gossip that this criminal has 5, 10, 20 bitcoins. This crook has this many bitcoins. Where do we find the register? How do we ask? Do we need to seize their mobile phones or not? Then we have public institutions, some municipalities or some agencies where you have a corrupt director and then with public assets they're mining bitcoins, but then police enters there and they don't have a clue what to do. Where do we see whether Bitcoin was mined there or not with using public electricity? So my question, if I need to wrap up, is can you go back 10 years and give us your thoughts, advices, and also how smaller countries that don't have these mega assets of your American institutions and accessibility to these, these Google machines, servers, name it, data mines. How do we address these issues, and do we have instruments to deal with this, or this needs to be dealt only by the only superpower in the world?
Yeah. And there's one other question over there. We'll get that to, and then we'll try to wrap all the answers together as we finish up. Is there another hand? Yes, sir.
John Walsh, member
Hey, John.
of
Yep.
the Intelligence Security Forum. This has been a great dialogue, and I really do appreciate it, because there's so many things that we can continue to discuss later today and maybe tonight. My question is really related more towards what do we have today, and I like what my brother Andreas said as far as reality versus theory. Like, you've done a great job at the CFTC, and I've said this even before you've been there. I was regulated by the I was a professional commodity trader for 25 years. Right. Even when I wasn't happy with the results, I thought it was fair. What has been done with crypto has been fair, whether we like it or not. It's been fair. My main question is about, do we need regulation, or we need the government to come up with a framework? It's two different things. So for me to open up a crypto account, I give just as much information as it is to open up any other account I have. I have to give all the beneficial ownership. I have to give my address. Soon they're going to ask for my blood. I have no doubt about it, right? So what more can I do as an investor, as a servant of the marketplace, and just a citizen, versus how much does the government have to do to create that framework that we desperately need? So basically, theory versus reality. You can't answer that question, but if we can touch it.
Yeah, I know we have 5 minutes. So John and the gentleman from East County will try to answer as best we can this question. So, gentlemen, you want to tackle that?
Look, I'm for regulation because I like consistency and transparency. And then you have the teeth with enforcement, right? As opposed to just a framework. Because you may not have the enforcement part of it. So I want regulation. I think, as I said, clear rules. When people know what the rules of the games are, that's good for everybody. So I'm for regulation. Like you said, that was kind of the experience of a small state without the resources. And that's the need why we need regulation. That's why we also need partnership. That's why we need to talk to our federal counterparts and really have a force multiplier, because we are in a global digital marketplace. And somebody in Vermont, if they're harmed or defrauded, the wrongdoer is not going to be in Vermont. So how do I, with the jurisdiction of my state border, extend past that? Who do I call? And that is the threshold question for me. And I think a lot of folks who perhaps don't have the resources are just getting educated on this. 10 years ago, I wasn't thinking about this, right? I was thinking about the crime that was happening on the street that we could see. And I think one of the interesting issues of this, when you talk about the difference, and this is a whole other discussion, when you get into what we call white-collar crime, is it's usually behind closed doors, utilizing that specialized knowledge or occupational status, using deception. And from a law enforcement standpoint, well, that's hard to enforce. So we need regulation, in my opinion, from the federal government. You need states to buy into it with that partnership. And you also need states to get educated on this, to work with industry. This isn't going away. We have to have that balance of regulation, innovation, and economic development. But what you described really resonated with me, because 10 years ago, I wasn't thinking about it.
Any final thoughts, Brian? Andreas?
Yeah, well, so I'm going to take your point back to the team with whom I work at Andreessen, because I think that there are probably a number of private sector organizations or companies that can serve as reference points or even partners for smaller jurisdictions with limited resources to be able to prosecute. I mean, you're right. I think bridging the two from theory, to reality. The reality is that these people should be able to be caught. Or the theory is they should be able to be caught, but the reality is, do you have the capabilities to catch them? And I think that there's a gap that can be closed there. And I think to the regulatory and framework question, I think that's why I wanted to focus the most amount of attention, I think, on the the amount of integrity that the market currently has, so that we don't, again, try to fit something into the model that previously existed, regardless of where we see the innovation going. And the theory now is the reality in a number of years, right? The theory now is the future. And one of the things that I've learned being in this role with venture capitalists is what they think that future looks like, and it's incredible. And I would just like to kind of close with a point, since we're in the National Archives. There was a copy of the Constitution, an original Constitution that was auctioned off at Sotheby's a few weeks ago. There was a group of crypto enthusiasts who created what's called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization that solicited funds, that created a governance mechanism that was distributed among all governance token holders to try to purchase this at Sotheby's and have it be displayed in public according to the wishes of that decentralized organization. Ultimately, it wasn't the best bidding strategy to advertise how much money you had going into an auction, and they ended up losing but they raised $42 million in 10 days, and the copy was auctioned for $43 million. But to your point, and to the General's point, you can't serve a DAO a subpoena. And we are trying to come up with legislation, ideas for recognizing DAOs as entities that can, be captured by tax laws, limited liability laws, and enforcement mechanisms. So there's a lot more there.
Just the last sentence for John. We have a device in Germany. If you understand me, I expressed myself wrongly. So you should try. Really, that's also for our African friends to do some awareness raising. And thank you, Robert, to just push it that we can just move forward together.
Thank you, JC. Great panel, guys. Thank you very much. More today from Congressman French Hill, also this afternoon on
right.
crypto. Thank you, Robert.
We could, where are the mics? We're gonna, if you could come over here with the mics.